welcome to this tutorial. This time I'm going to be working on this lovely girl. She is a Clumber Spaniel and she's got some really lovely light curly fur, and her light fur has a lot of different tones in it. She's got some green, she's got some blue, she's got some purple, so she's going to be really perfect to show you how I actually do light coloured white, like lemon yellow fur. So I'm going to jump straight into her. I've done her eyes here. The reference photo I'm working from is, her eyes are sort of drooped. She has like droopiness on her eyes, so I can't really see them that well, and my reference photo isn't actually all that great. So this is all I've done so far, and what I'm going to be doing is just working on this area around the eye. It's going to take me roughly 40 minutes. And she's got some like lemon white / liver coloured patches here, and the rest of the area is just white and like a creamy colour. So that's what I'm going to be doing. I'll list the colours as I use them. There's not really any tools that I'm using apart from my eraser, and yeah, that's about it. That's all the tools that special tools I'm using is that eraser, and I'll list the colours like I said. So let's get into drawing her. I just need to tuck my hair behind my ears, otherwise it flops. So I've started off a tiny little bit on her eyelid here, and just going to gently erase away those lines where I've drawn where she has some markings. So I'm just looking at my reference picture and just erasing those lines away. Just ever so slightly and very lightly, so I can still see them, because those patches are quite a lot darker than the actual fur itself, so I don't need to erase them too much, just enough so that I can still somewhat see those patches through the fur. So I'm just going to pick out some colours which I can see in her fur. I'm going to use mainly the warm grey one, and in my Pablos I'm going to use the cream, and probably some beiges. Ash grey definitely, these are Pablo ones, and light beige. And of course I'm going to use the Pablo white, and for some of the different colours that I put into white I'm going to use the light violet, some sky blue, and what else can I see in there? There's a little bit of pink. So I'm actually going to use some granite rose in the Pablos, and possibly grab out some light flesh from the Polychromos as well. And there's a couple of colours in the Luminance range which are great for this kind of fur, and that is this one, which is Raw Umber 10%, and then there's also Olive Brown 10%, and then there's it's like a mauvey grey somewhere. This one? Yeah, grey, violet grey. So I'm going to pick out those colours to begin with. If you don't have any of these colours, just pick out sort of light, very light pinks, very light blues, light purples, light greys, cold greys, warm greys. Yeah, so just basically warm, light pastel colours in yellow, blue and violet. And they're the colours that we're mainly going to use. We might put a touch of green in there, but I've just picked out these ones because these are what I can see directly on my reference photo at the moment. So I'm going to start with getting comfortable. So I'm going to start with my base layer of warm grey 1, and I just need to pay attention to the direction of the fur in my reference. And I need my scrap piece of paper too. So I'm just going to put this first base layer down in the direction of the fur, as I always do when starting fur work. Just creating a very nice layer for our colour. Just making sure that I pay attention to the direction of the fur, just continually reference my photo. Make sure I get all of that fur down. I was originally going to do the tutorial on the curly fur in her, which is on her chest area here. But I thought what might actually be more useful is learning the colours that I put into this kind of fur, because the curly ear tutorial that I did on Elfie back in January, you can apply the same technique to curls but using the different colours. So you'd use the different colours that I show in this tutorial and then reference it to the curly ear tutorial of Elfie. I will do a curly ear tutorial on light coloured fur in the future. I might even record one doing Nelly here, but I won't be releasing it just yet. I think it's more necessary for you to gain the fundamentals in the colours and the way that I render light coloured fur, rather than jumping straight in and doing curly fur, which is a little bit more complex. So just learning the colours and the process in which I create light fur like this be a lot more useful at this stage. So, got a nice circular area to work on. First base layer down, and then what I'm going to do is take my cream pencil here and just add some areas of cream where she's a little bit more warm in tone. So that would be just underneath her eye and a little bit just above this patch here. There's like a liver patch. She's a little bit lighter up there, warmer, so I'm just adding another layer of cream. This is the second layer to that area. And then underneath the eye as well is where she's a lot warmer. And then where she's cooler in tone, I'm going to take a cold grey one and add a layer of that. But I'm adding the warm section first. You can add warm or cold first, it doesn't really matter, but I prefer to do it warm and then cold on this piece. Other pieces it changes, other pieces I prefer to do the cold first and then the warm. But there's no right way to actually do it. So the rest of the area is pretty much all the cold grey, so I'm just filling it all in and just shading around those areas where I've added the cream. At this stage I'm not pushing too hard on my pencil. My pressure is staying quite light. So there's our first set of layers. Now the next thing we're going to do is start to fill in the liver / lemon markings on her face. So I'm going to do that with my olive brown 10% pencil, and I'm just going to roughly mark in where those markings are. My hair is just all sorts of tickly today. Probably help if I actually decided to put it up, but didn't. So using this darker pencil just to outline those areas, what I'm actually going to do is use a slightly darker one because they're a lot darker than that. So I'm just going to use some brown ochre and just darken where I've just outlined that. I'm just going over that very lightly in the brown ochre just so it stands out a lot more. I'm just going to do that for all of the spots so I can see. Just add the layer of the olive brown. I can never remember the name of this pencil. They all look quite similar, so just laying the spots down of the olive brown and then going over where it needs it with the brown ochre. I must say, there isn't much variation of tone in her white fur, but to bring it more to life, because it's such a bad quality photo, I'm actually going to improvise, so you'll see how it makes a difference when I start to add blues and pinks and purples. And I mainly add those types of colours in shadows or darker areas in a reference photo. If you take my drawing of Holly, when I drew that light-haired pointer, there's a tutorial on her. When I drew her, I improvised a fair amount of her fur and just added the colours in the shadows. So, I'm almost done with this. And then we can move on to add in some different colours. I've got such itchy face. Right, so, more itches, I'm sorry. Can fill in that little eyebrow patch that she's got going on now. And then what I'm going to start to do is just sharpen my ochre pencil here up real sharp, and then I'm just going to add some fur lines coming off of the eyebrow patch. And I'm going to do this now because it's a lot different when you're doing dark fur, because you generally do this at the end with the dark pencil. But because there's not much definition going into her white fur, I'm actually going to add them now because why not? It doesn't really matter if there's not many layers going down. The layers in white fur don't get too dark, so you can sort of be a bit more free than you would with dark coloured fur. They're all the same sort of tones, so now I'm just adding some brown ochre polychromos and just layering this where the darker parts in this eyebrow are. And then I'm going to go over with some nougat and then some walnut brown. So I haven't actually added any fur lines yet, it's all just shading. So I'm just making sure that I get the eyebrow right. Then we can move into doing the different tones in the white fur. So now I'm just adding walnut brown, and I'm not adding any fur lines with this, I'm just shading it as well. I'll get the base colours down for white fur and then I will add fur lines, because I find with white fur you don't need to add that many fur lines because it's white, And when you're layering light colours, it tends to do it automatically for you. So, just need to pick out 2 different colours, because where around her eye it's really pink. So I'm just going to add that little pinky bit in. This wouldn't be a colour that you would add for white or light coloured fur, but I just need to add it in to add to the eye. So I'm just adding this in real quick. And then we are going to add some shadow around this patch here. And to do that, I'm going to use some shades of Pablo pencil, and I'm using light beige and just ordinary beige. So I'm going to sharpen them up. And now what we're going to do is just add some of these. I'm going to start with the ash grey, and I'm just going to just shade very, very lightly around that marking. You won't see much difference if you're using same pencils, because the ash grey is actually pretty similar to the warm grey one. But if you persevere, you will actually find that it comes out a lot smoother. So I'm just shading on both sides of that marking. And then I'm going to switch to the light beige and do exactly the same in the same areas. And then we're just going to darken up that patch. So I'm adding some brown ochre. And then I'm just going to add some nougat in the darkest areas of that patch, not all over. And then I'm going to go over in a second with some walnut brown. Okay, so in this shadow area around her eye now, I'm going to start adding some of those colours that you wouldn't normally think to add. So, excuse me, I'm going to add some sky blue, and I'm going to sharpen these pencils up real sharp. Sky blue, and I think some light violet, and I think I'm going to add some pink in there as well. So I'm going to add some Granite Rose. And also I will just sharpen up some Earth Green. And this is a good colour to use when you're doing white and light coloured dogs. Okay, so I'm going to start by adding the sky blue. I'm just going to shade very, very lightly all over. So all in that section. And then over that I'm going to add some Earth Green, and I'm going to blend that into the marking and then blend it out as well. And then nearer the top next to the eye there's some pink, So I'm adding some Granite Rose. And then at the very top, between those two markings, there's some light violet. The pink doesn't always come out all that great, so sometimes you have to re-layer or push a little bit harder. And if your pink isn't working at all, then I recommend that you would use this pencil, and it's the Pink Madder Lake, but use it very, very lightly because it's quite a pink. But it's a lovely pencil to use for light coloured fur. And then to tone it all down, all you do is just add some warm grey. So I'm going to use warm grey 3 and just shade it all over, just tone it down, and then if it needs it I can add the next grey down, which would be the warm grey 4, so then I can shade that very lightly as well, just until it gets to the right tone. And that's brought that little bit of white to life. It still looks, when you're looking at it, it still looks white, but it's not because you've added all those colours over the top. But it still has the appearance of white, and that's because white fur is made up of all the colours. So if you add different types of colours and not just warm greys and whites and creams, you're going to make it a lot more alive. So I'm going to continue around the face, so I'll do underneath the eye I think. So I'm going to just add a little bit more cold grey. I feel it needs just a touch more. And I haven't added any fur lines into that piece because, as I said before, the reference photo I'm working from isn't that great, but it doesn't necessarily need any just yet. I will wait until I've done a chunk of this before I start adding any fur lines. So I'm going to start with the blue and very lightly shade the blue. Just checking my reference photo and following this blue on the contours of her face. And then there's pink. It's pink because, as I said, around her eye it's really brown and really like a caput mortuum is the perfect colour to describe it. It's really pink and like a dark reddy brown. So adding some pinks in there really helps with this one, but I generally tend to add pinks to this kind of portrait anyway. So I'm just going to continue her markings around, and I'm just using a Beaster pencil. Continue them around. And then they start to get quite distinctive, so I'm just going to add some distinct lines which I can see within her markings with some walnut brown. So, surrounding that area as well, I'm going to just quickly shade some caput mortuum just to bring that part of the eye and that marking together. And I've decided to, hopefully if my webcam doesn't get out of sync, decided to record my face whilst doing this as well. But if my face isn't on there, it's because it came out of sync, because my webcam does that for some reason. But I decided to record myself with the webcam as well, so you get a face to what I'm saying, and also because I find it quite interesting to, when I'm editing the videos, on how I actually work and how I move my head and the things that we do with our face. Like, you pull funny faces when you're concentrating, don't you? But if my little face isn't down the bottom, then just completely ignore that because it's not relevant. So I'm just working back up the face now, just around this marking. I'm just adding some violet grey. This is a perfect colour for white dogs as well, and just shading very, very lightly. I'm holding the pencil sort of in the middle, just holding it at an angle to the paper and just shading. This colour is perfect for shadows on white dogs. It is the right tone for shadows, and it's a darker colour of the light violet, and using the two in white dog portraits I find really, really good. So that's what I'm using mainly for shadows and darker areas. So back to around here again. There's the marking underneath her eye, which I'm just going to add in. I'm going to use burnt umber and just shade that in because it's quite a dark patch. I think this burnt umber would be perfect, mixed with a bit of Caput Mortuum. So, just darkening up underneath this eye as well. Right, so let's start to add some of those fun colours. Always start with the blue for some reason. You don't have to do that, but I always do. And again, I'm just going to follow some sort of contour on her face, and I can do that. If your reference photo isn't that great, you can adjust your contrast settings and your brightness on your reference photo using some photo editing software, and then it will depict those light and dark areas better. I find if you turn the brightness down or turn the picture to black and white even, then you can depict your shadows and the bone structure on the face. Where there are shadows, I tend to add all of these colours. So I add the blue, I add the purple, I add the pink. And that's all I'm doing. I'm just finding the dark areas on my reference photo and then shading them with the blue and sort of contouring. And that's how I create the shadows, and that's where I know to add those colours. If you have trouble finding the shadows on your reference photo, if it would help you guys, I will do a tutorial on how to edit your software, edit your photo with the software to bring out those shadows so you can find those colours. But if you have a photo and you don't invert it to black and white or adjust the contrast or anything, then you can use your colour picker and just select the area of the photo and pick out the colour. You can use that method, and there's a tutorial on that. I've just added some earth green over that blue, and it's made it, you can see it's got quite a nice shadow going on now. So I'm just going to add some pink above it. I don't really add the pink to the area where I've done the blue and the green. That's because the pink is a warm colour and you don't really associate it with the shadows. So I'm just adding it above the shadow, then you give the area around the blue and the green a light, and then it makes the blue and the green darker. So it creates more of that shadow. And then I'm going to just add some violet. I'm going to add some of that to the blue and the green. And I'm also going to add a touch of it to the pink, because the pink and the purple complement each other. And then to tone it down, I'm going to add some greys. I'm going to add the warm grey 3, this one. Just shade it all over, just to tone it down because it's not quite as bright as that. And then where needed, I'm going to add some of the violet grey. And then with this one now, I can start to add some fur lines, and I'm going to add it in this violet grey. So I've got quite a sharp pencil, and all I'm going to do is just add a few lines here and there. Not too many, just every now and then, just going to add some very, very soft fur lines. I'm going to add them more to the blue and the green area because that's a shadow and that's where there will be more definition in that type of fur. So just adding a few more there than I would anywhere else. If you have darkened or you think it needs to lighten an area, you can use your white and go over it, and then that will add some white to those pinks as well, so it will end up looking more like a white dog. It might look weird when you've only got a little bit done like this. It might look weird adding all these colours, but once you've got the whole lot of it done, it will look cohesive and it will look good. Obviously, you can go back over and erase any areas that you think need it, but you shouldn't need to. Adding these colours, it will be perfect for white animals. I've never found a problem where not adding these colours has looked weird. It's always given the portrait a bit of life to it, because when you just add straight greys down, it gets a bit boring, so bringing a bit of colour to that just gives it a bit of vitality. So now I'm moving onto the top of her eye, above her eye here, and this area is mainly blue, and there's some like bluey greys in there, so I'm just using the blue. I'm not going to touch the green this time, just adding the blue and making sure that I add it a little bit into those markings and also around them. So I need another colour, and there's a perfect colour in here, and it is the silver grey in the Luminance range, and there's also a similar colour in the Pablos as well. A similar colour in the Polychromos would probably be the Cold Grey 1 or Cold Grey 2. But this silver grey is absolutely perfect. And I'm just going to add some of this, mainly all over, because it's quite dark, but mainly around the markings on her face. And then I'm going to add some pink above the eye because of what I said before with the Caput Mortuum colours coming out of her. She just needs a little bit of pink around the eyes. Also the pinks help set off the lemon liver colour of her markings. So adding them around her markings as well is a good idea. And then I'm going to darken it off with some nougat. So it's not quite as light as what I've drawn it. Just adding some nougat to add some shadow. Yeah. So I'm pretty much almost done with this area, so I'm just going to move my attention to where her face sits against her ear, because it's a lot more green, and then you can see the contrast between the green area and the blue area, and I think that will be quite interesting. I'm just going to add a quick few fur lines in just above her eye here. This is where her eyebrow is like creasing. So I'm just adding some fur lines in there, in some Warm Grey 4. Yeah, so I'm just going to add a bit of this turquoise green because I can see a colour reflected just above that blue area, just above that marking in her eye. And it's pretty much this colour, so I'm going to add that and see how it goes. Just a few light strokes of it, nothing too hard. And that really sets off that area. Yeah, I'm going to keep that pencil out because I will use it elsewhere to tie that area together. So, I just need a quick drink. Right, let's go on to this area by her ear. So I'm going to lay down a base colour of Warm Grey 1. Just erase that little marking there. Warm Grey 1 to start with, again in the fur direction. I might just trying to plan where this ear is going. No, that'd be fine. No, I'll erase it a little bit. Just worried about this line. So, just going to lay down some Warm Grey 1 in the fur direction. And then I'll add some colours, add some different tones. So, there's a little bit of warmth there just by this curl, so I'm just going to add some cream. Remember, the cream for the warm areas and the cold grey one for the cold looking areas. So I'm going to add the cold grey one to the rest of it. And then we're going to start adding some different colours down. So I'm going to grab out the ash grey and the light beige again. I'm going to start with the ash grey and just shade. And again, there's not much colour difference between this and the Warm Grey 1. It just smooths it all out. It's just an extra layer just to give that area a bit more depth. That's all we're doing. Making sure that I colour right up and into the existing area I've done to blend it together. And then we're going to add the light beige. Just deciding where to add this. I'm going to add this in the darker areas. And there's a dark patch just underneath this curl. I was trying to decide earlier whether it was part of her ear or whether it was part of her face, and it is part of her face. So I'm just going to add this beige around that. And then we're going to get straight into that dark patch. Sorry, I got itches again. I'm going to get straight into that dark patch, and I'm going to use my raw umber 10% and just fill in that dark patch with that. It's quite a warm dark patch, so I'm adding some sort of muted grey yellows. Just using a different direction of stroke where that pencil line of her ear meets that area. And then I'm going to add some nougat and just define this really dark section. Let's just move my camera around as well. I'm just going to define this dark section at the top here. Go back over it with some walnut brown. And then what I'm going to add is my earth green all over. That's pretty much the colour that is reflected here. It's earth green, and then we've got some greys and some nougat and some walnut brown. So just shading that. Making sure that I get it quite dark in the darkest areas. And then we're going to go over that with some warm grey 3 to darken the area some more. And then where it's darker, we're going to add some nougat and some walnut brown and maybe some darker greys. We'll add the browns first. Also just a tiny little bit of brown ochre. Yes. And then just blend some brown in there. And then on the dark areas, some walnut brown. I'm going to use some fur strokes for this. And then we're just going to add a tiny bit of blue in there. And then to blend this darker section out with the rest of the fur, I'm going to use the same colours. I'm going to use some olive brown 10% and just shade that into the fur from that dark area. Just shade it into the fur. And then where needed, I'm going to use my violet grey and shade that over that olive brown area as well. You can see a nice shadow at the top there. And then you can start to see one forming on the bottom here. And then to blend that blue eye area that we did to the rest of the fur, I'm just going to continue with that blue because it goes all the way along there, so I'm just going to continue it. And then at the bottom there's actually a different tone of green, and I'm just going to grab out some olive green yellowish and shade some of that. So then we can add some pink to the white light areas to give them an extra bit of lightness. And then a little bit of this turquoise green which I added just above the eye, and just continue that round. And then just a few touches of grey here and there. And that's pretty much everything. That's all I need to tell you to do light white fur. Just blending in some nougat there, and that's just to help blend those two areas. If I need to blend the areas a little bit more, I can just grab out my Caran d'Ache colours blender and just blend them together with that. But apart from that, that's pretty much it to that white fur. If you think it needs it, where the sun shines on her a little bit here, you can add some really quite a nice yellow. I'm just using the Polychromos cream, just adding some really like yellowy bits. That's where the sun is catching on her. Now, in my reference photo, this side of her face is actually in the light. this area is in the shade, so I'm using a lot more blue-green tones in the left side of her face. When I come to do the right side of her face, I will actually use a lot more of my creams and browns and yellows. So to do this side, I would probably use the cream, and then I would use my brown ochre. I would use the yellow ochre pencils in the Polychromos. In my luminance box, I would most likely use these tones. I've got some Naples ochre and the primrose colour and a few orangey colours as well. And also a tiny little touch of green and the pink. The pink, the yellow and the oranges I would use for when the light is shining on white fur, and for any darker shadows I would use the greens, the blues and the light violet. And that's pretty much it. Just where you've got cooler tones, remember to use the cooler tones of the green, the blue and the purple, and where you've got the warmer tones, use the warm light pastel tones, so the yellows and the pinks. You just have to bear that in mind. And then obviously you will find some of those other colours, so you will find some of the purples in the right side where the sun, sorry my hair is gone. You will find some of the violets and purples and blues in the area where the sun is shining directly on, so don't avoid using them completely, because around this area here I've got, it's in the sun, so there's oranges and there's yellows, but there's also those shadows where hair is overlapping, so I will need to use those blues and purples on that side as well. So just pay attention to your reference photo, use a colour picker if necessary, but this is just a simple tutorial to show you the colours that I put into white fur. And this side of her face is actually white, whereas the other side is like a lemon cream. So just pay close attention to your reference photo, use your colour picker, use what I've given you about the violets and the blues, and just have a little play. Don't worry if you get it wrong, you can always finish it and see where it goes, or start again if you're really finding it difficult. I'd advise you to continue and see how it comes out, because you might like the final outcome. My little image here as it is looks a little bit weird, but as soon as I get the rest of her face in, it will all start to look good, and your eyes will tell you that it's white, but you know that there's loads and loads of different colours in there. So have a little play, have some fun, and I will see you in next week's tutorial, guys. Bye!